All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to trace the logical steps of a really fascinating ancient argument, one that tackles a universal human problem, that feeling of separation. We're going straight to the source text to see exactly how it builds its case for a path to salvation. So, let's get into it. The entire argument really boils down to this one profound question. It's a huge philosophical puzzle, right? How can something that's imperfect ever truly connect with something that's perfect? How can a being that's flawed bridge the gap to a being defined by absolute wholeness? This is the core problem the text sets out to solve.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for following the text answer. We're going to move through 5 logical steps. We'll start with where the problem even came from, then we'll look at the impossible standard it creates. From there, we'll check out an early kind of temporary fix, then shift to prophecies of a final solution, and finally see how it all comes together in one ultimate answer.
First up, the origin of sin. See, the text argues that before we can even begin to appreciate the solution, we have to fully, and I mean fully, grasp the nature of the problem that created this fundamental separation in the first place.
So the text breaks this down into this powerful 3-part sequence, almost like dominoes falling. It all starts with deception from the outside, a lie. That lie leads to a conscious choice, an act of disobedience. And the immediate result? It isn't some lightning bolt from the sky. It's an internal consequence, shame and fear, which causes them to hide. And that creates the very first separation. And then, right in the middle of all this chaos, the text drops the very first prophecy, and it's a super cryptic one. It talks about this long-term conflict between the descendants of the woman and the serpent. It promises a struggle, yeah, with both sides getting wounded, but it also hints at a final, decisive victory for humanity's side. So this initial separation, this break, it sets the stage for the next part of the argument. If humanity is now imperfect, well, what's the standard for being righteous? This brings us to what the text frames as a truly impossible standard. And that standard is the Torah. Now, you might hear that word and immediately think law, but the word itself simply means teaching or instruction. But in this context, it's way more than just a list of do's and don'ts. It's presented as the perfect blueprint for holiness, a direct reflection of God's own perfect nature. The text uses this really powerful target analogy to explain this. Think about it. Righteousness is hitting the bullseye dead center, and that means keeping the entire Torah perfectly. Sin, or hatah in Hebrew, literally means missing that mark. And here's the crucial part of the argument. It doesn't matter if you miss by an inch or a mile. Breaking even one command means you've missed the target completely. So why such an absolute all-or-nothing standard? Well, the argument grounds it in the very nature of God, who is described as Kadosh Adonai. That repetition, holy, 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 it's there for a reason. It's for maximum emphasis. It signifies a state of absolute, untouchable perfection. Because of this, even one tiny miss creates this massive, impassable chasm. Okay, so this super high standard creates a really practical dilemma that the text itself highlights. The ancient system for dealing with sin, the one laid out in the Torah, it was all centered around a physical temple and a priesthood. Since those don't exist anymore, the text poses this critical question: how on earth is it possible to solve this sin problem today? And that question leads us directly to the temporary system that the text says God provided. It's this ancient mechanism designed for atonement, and it's all built on the principle of sacrifice. The Hebrew word for this is Korban, and its literal meaning is the key to understanding the whole thing. The root of the word means to bring near. So a sacrifice wasn't just about paying a penalty. It was a mechanism, a way for someone separated by sin to bridge that gap and actually approach God again. The process itself was just dripping with symbolism. Picture this. The sinner would physically lay their hands on the head of a perfect, unblemished animal, symbolizing a transfer. They'd confess their sin over it, and then that innocent animal was sacrificed in their place. It was a direct, physical picture of substitution. And through that act, atonement was made. So if you boil the entire logic of that whole sacrificial system down, it comes down to this one single powerful principle. The innocent dies for the guilty. This idea is the bedrock for everything else the text is about to build. But, and this is a huge but, the argument doesn't stop there. The text claims this entire system of animal sacrifice was always meant to be temporary. It was like a giant living, breathing illustration pointing towards something way bigger, a prophesied savior who would be the final, ultimate sacrifice. And a key piece of evidence the text brings up comes from the prophet Isaiah. It describes this figure who suffers, but not for his own mistakes. He's wounded for our transgressions. The passage goes on to say that God has laid on him the iniquity of us all, which should sound really familiar. It's a direct echo of that substitution principle from the animal sacrifices. So this naturally leads to the central question the text wants its reader to wrestle with. Who is this unnamed he? Who is this person that suffers as a substitute for us, for my people?
So the argument then starts to build this composite profile, kind of like a detective piecing together clues. It pulls various prophecies from all over the Tanakh. It says this Messiah would be born in a very specific town, Bethlehem. He would suffer a specific fate, being pierced in his hands and feet. He'd be rejected by the experts, but would end up becoming the most important piece of the puzzle. And, crucially, he would not stay dead. His soul wouldn't be left in the grave, or Sheol.
Okay, so all of these threads, the problem of sin, the impossible standard, the principle of sacrifice, and this prophetic profile, they're all woven together now to form the argument's final conclusion, the ultimate solution. And this is it. This is where the entire logical progression has been heading. The text's conclusion is that the prophesied Messiah is the ultimate Korban, the final, perfect, all-sufficient sacrifice that the entire ancient system was just a shadow of.
According to the text, this ultimate sacrifice brings in something totally new, a new covenant, and it's presented in direct contrast to the old one. The old covenant was an external law written on stone tablets offering only temporary fixes. This new one is described as internal, written on the heart, and it promises a permanent solution, where sins aren't just covered up, they are completely forgiven and remembered no more.
So let's just recap that entire logical path one more time. The problem? Sin creates separation from a holy God. The attempted solution? An impossible law and temporary repetitive sacrifices. And the prophesied solution? A final, once-and-for-all sacrifice by the Messiah that provides permanent atonement.
So what really makes this solution ultimate? The text's logic all comes down to the number 1. Under this new covenant, only one sacrifice is ever needed. Not one per year, not one per person. Just one. For everyone, for all time. That's it. So after tracing this really intricate logic, all the way from the first problem to a final permanent solution, the text leaves us with a much bigger question to think about. What are the implications when an ancient argument proposes a single, final answer to what it defines as a universal human condition?